Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to explain how to develop all four sides of your mind. And to preface this video, I have spent around 10 years studying this system, both just Myers-Briggs in general, all the archetypes involved, and more specifically, the cognitive functions, and spending time to fully understand the base elements that make up this system. So the four sides of the mind, the cognitive functions, all 16 types. And I've dedicated at least the past 6 to 7 years to, how do I put it, further the research in this Jungian analytical psychology. It has dictated what jobs I go for and how long I'm there for, because my whole objective was to develop all four sides of my mind as much as humanly possible. And along the way, I have found different tips, tricks, strategies to develop the different sides of the mind and to develop the different functions in a multitude of ways, which I'm going to go over in this video. And I must say, once you start to integrate all four sides, I find that it is impossible for your life to not to get better. It happens automatically as a result, because most people's weakness or dysfunction can be directly tied to a break in the chain, certain sides of the mind that are not developed. So I find it paramount that each person works on this. And what I find interesting is that you don't even need to know that this system exists. I have found people that are quite developed and integrated psychologically with all four sides to a certain degree, just out of the direction and motivation to develop themselves and to do what's right, and to do what's hard and difficult, and take the high road, which most people do not take, because it's suffering, it's pain, it's misery, but it's also all the antithesis of those things. It's beautiful, it's amazing. I mean, we all know instinctively, to have anything of worth, you must go through the pain and the hard work to get there. All right, so that said, I'm gonna start the whole premise of this video and let's get into it. All right, so how to develop all four sides of the mind. So first, I'm gonna start with cognitive access. And before I go into it, if you guys don't know about the cognitive functions, I would suggest for you to learn those first. Understand the basics before you watch this video. Okay? Understand the different types, just the base elements of the video. I am planning in future videos to create videos talking about each function on its own and just different aspects. Okay? All right. So with cognitive access, the access is so there's four accesses, and each access consists of two functions. So I'll illustrate. There is TI and Fe. There is Te and Fi. And these are, well, I'll get there in a second, okay? So there's that, there's Se and I, and there's Si and E, okay? And so there's the four axes, okay? And what affects one affects the other, and vice versa, okay? So these two axes are judging functions, okay? I'll write that. So there's two kinds of functions. There's introverted judging function like Ti and Fi, which basically all your judgment comes from those. Fi is discernment, Ti is logic, amongst other things. Then you have extroverted judging functions, Fe and Te, which is basically focused on other people's Ti and Fi. So that's just a on the surface explanation. I could probably make a 3-hour video on that alone, but let's continue. So these four functions, these four functions, these two axes are processing functions, okay? And it's literally what it sounds like, processing. So as you process something psychologically, mentally, you're using these functions, okay? And if you look at a stack, there is two judging functions and two processing functions. So one of each. So everybody has one introverted judging function, one extroverted judging function, one introverted processing function, and one extroverted sensing function, okay? So I just needed to cover that real quick. Before I continue with the video, you have to understand that, before moving forward. All right, so cognitive orbit. What's cognitive orbit? Well, cognitive orbit is when two of the same category functions affect each other. So an example is Fi and Fe, okay? So if you break it into four categories in another way, which is feeling, thinking, sensing, intuition, you can only have one of each in your main side of your mind, right? So one is going to be in your ego and subconscious, and one is going to be in your shadow. But through cognitive orbit, it's almost like a coin, right? There's two sides of the coin, but the coin is one thing. That's what cognitive orbit is, essentially, okay? So I needed to break that down as well. Okay, now we can start with the first bulletin. So cognitive access. So a way to develop one of your sides of your mind is through cognitive access. So when you develop, say you're Fi hero, okay? The more you're feeding Fi, and what I mean by developing Fi is you're consistently using it, right? Practice makes perfect. And just the mere exercising it is growing it, right? Because it's like working out. As you're working out your bicep, as long as you're feeding it the right nutrients, it's going to repair larger. That's the whole point, okay? So, and vice versa. Fi is connected to Te, like we showed here, okay, through cognitive access. And as you work extroverted thinking, it indirectly works the other function because it's tied with it. So just for a breakdown real quick to kind of illustrate what I mean, TE is a multitude of things, okay? But just one of those things is is your status, okay? FE is also a type of status, but that's for another video. So how you feel can emanate outwards to kind of indicate what your status is. If you feel very strong about your self-image and your self-identity, that in return is gonna garner other people to think highly of you. Okay, TE cares about what other people think. So TI is the other side of the equation. It wants to be fed TI. So that's just kind of a one example of how that can operate. Okay, so that's one way to develop the different sides of your mind, because the more you develop your functions, as a subsequent result and consequence, you're developing the different sides of the mind. Okay, cognitive orbit. So like I said, FI to FE, the more that you develop it through, so as you develop this function, yes, it develops your axis, which is the other function attached to it, but and it's almost like attached to the hip, like Siamese twins. Whereas FI and FE, for example, is the same coin. So there's two sides of the coin, whereas FI and TE, they're like two different coins that are connected by another piece of element amongst the two. Okay? So that's another way that you can develop the different sides of your mind. Spending time in different sides of the mind. So, not to get too into this, there's 4 sides of the mind, right? Which I explained in the previous video. So if you guys haven't watched that video, I would highly suggest for you guys to go and watch it. It would definitely help you understand what we're trying to educate you here, okay? So the more that you spend in, say, your first and second side of the mind, the more synergy is activated, and there's going to be a synergetic effect where both of those sides of the mind are going to feed into each other. So, for example, we'll do my type stack, which is INFP. So NE, SI, and TE. Okay, so this stack right here, it's supposed to be an N. It's an ugly N. There we go. So that's the stack of an INFP. As you're developing this, well, the second gateway, which is through this function, which is the second gateway into the second side of the mind, which is the subconscious, is going to affect the first side of the mind. So what affects the first side is going to affect the second side. So say you spend 3 or 4 months consistently staying in your first 4 function area, which has to do with your first 4 functions and not the shadow functions. You're going to be really concentrating, developing all these 4 functions, which consists of both your first and second side of the mind, okay? And then using that same logic, that's how you apply the shadow. So the more that you spend in your unconscious, which is your third side of the mind, is gonna, as a consequence, also grow your super ego, which is your fourth side of the mind, which in this example for an INFP consists of FE, NI, SE, TI. Okay? So that's another way to develop the four sides of the mind. Okay, now we're going to get into environments. This is a big one. The kind of people you're around is going to affect you massively. Okay, so I'm sure we've all heard that spreading yourself too thin is not normally going to result in a lot of growth. Okay, so if you're jumping from your first and second side of your mind, which I call the light section, and jumping from that to your shadow, which is your third and fourth side of the mind, you're not going to make a whole lot of progress fast. Not to say that you can't do it, because you can, but you're just going to make more progress in all four sides, but at a very slow pace. In my experience, I find that it's more efficient to focus on one side of the fence or the other, the light versus the dark, and spending a significant period of time there to actually get your feet rooted there, where your neural pathways get developed. And it's a lot quicker and a lot faster to develop that side of your mind, because you have spent enough time to build the neural pathway to begin with. If you spend a couple weeks in your shadow and then you jump back out, which just means that you're just using all different sides, evenly over your weeks that you're living, it's just not as efficient, that I have found. Okay, so the kind of people you're around is going to affect this. So if you're around a lot of people that are shadow developed and they're constantly in their shadow, guess what? That is going to have an effect on your psyche. That happened to me. In my quest to develop different sides of my mind, I had to put myself in different jobs and different occupations, different roles, to garner different development in the different sides of my mind. And one place that I worked at was extremely unhealthy. And I had to put myself in that situation because of the different opportunities that were just very hard to come by. So I kind of knew that getting into it. But I was also trying to develop a lot of my subconscious during this time, so it wasn't the most efficient. But I definitely got a lot out of it, so it was still great. But I definitely learned from it that the people around you is going to affect what side of the mind, or at least what side of the fence, right? Because each side of the fence consists of two sides. So your ego and subconscious are part of what I call the light side, and the unconscious and the super ego is part of the dark side. Okay, and there's actually a good difference between subconscious and unconscious, by the way. A lot of people use it interchangeably outside of the system, but it's actually different. Sub means what? Right under the surface. So sub is closer to the surface than unconscious. Unconscious is even deeper. So there's actually a utility to use them in different ways. Okay, just wanted to say that real quick. Okay, so I feel like I covered that one pretty good. All right, so jobs. So I kind of hinted about it in the last bulletin, but yeah, your job is going to 100% affect what functions and what sides of the mind you're working. Certain jobs require certain functions, right? Certain positions require certain roles, certain functions, certain sides of the mind, like I said. Just for example, I have found that NI and SE are leading functions. So a lot of leaders tend to be using that access. That doesn't mean that it has to be in their ego, just means that they're using it. Could be in their shadow. But there's also, but that's in person. Okay. NE and SI can be leaders, but that's more of like a metaphysical context. Like, for example, this video. I am in the NE world of metaphysics, conceptual understanding. Okay. Whereas SENI access is more, SE is the physical realm. You see? So, though that's just kind of a quick little snippet in just one characteristic of those two accesses. Okay? So, jobs, going to affect you big time. And then emulating different personality types is going to have a profound effect. So just for example, I would watch this ESTP Twitch streamer, quite frequently, and I enjoyed him, and he was extremely funny, and had a lot of strengths in areas I was not even remotely good at. And by emulating certain aspects into my life in certain situations in controlled amounts, over time I started to adopt those characteristics in a good way. Of course, there's some collateral damage, that certain things that you don't want, when because you're practicing it, right? It's trial and error. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to emulate certain things that you don't want, that you don't find out until you do it. So it's just a process of learning, right? So yeah, that was the last one, and that's going to wrap up the video. And I would love to know what you guys think about, what's your favorite aspect of this list that you find interesting. And if you could like the video, that would be great. I would appreciate that. And if you could subscribe, that would be beautiful. And I will see you guys later.